I don't think it's a secret that a majority of black folks are struggling on this planet. Now, you could look at very specific examples, individual cases where black people are thriving. I'm talking about the types of success or worldly success, material success, money, influence that most people could never imagine, no matter what your ethnicity, your background may be, right? There are black folks who are the most powerful people on the planet. But when you look at it as a whole, whether it's in North America, Europe, or the motherland, the continent itself in Africa, there are black folks, majoritively, who would just seem to not be able to break that quote unquote glass ceiling. And when most people look at this, they think to themselves that surely it must be just based in the race or quote unquote race of these people. It must be about race. Therefore, it must be racism. There must be some sort of hidden hand, some sort of, agenda that is looking to keep these people down. And, this might sound valid. I get where this argument comes from. But when you look at the reality of the situation as opposed to the emotionality of the situation, when you look at the facts as opposed to the feelings, you start to recognize that the reason why black folks are struggling in the way that they are is because of the mass acceptance of the victim mentality. Let me run that back one more time. Black folks across the planet have been conditioned, programmed, and continue to perpetuate. And when I say conditioned, I'm not just talking about the outside world. I'm talking about in-house. I was born in Zimbabwe. My dad, I was actually the first generation out of apartheid, outside of the Rhodesia, quote unquote, regime, right? I was born in a new Zimbabwe. My dad was in the class of the first black students to go to an integrated school. So historic context-wise, my dad grew up in the midst of colonial Zimbabwe, colonial African nation. He had more excuses than anybody, as far as why he couldn't make it and the white man keeping him down. Yet, for some reason, he and his peers were able to figure it out, i.e., they did not make themselves victims, but instead they chose to overcome and to take advantage of the opportunities that they created for themselves, right? However, a majority of the people around them did not make the same decisions, but instead they wallowed in their misery and they made excuses as far as why they couldn't make it. Even today, now you look in America, and how long has it been since black folks have had the exact same opportunities? If you talk to most black folks, they would tell you that, we still don't have the same opportunities because the white man, but the reality is not so. The fact is, there's a mentality that's keeping folks stuck. So that being said, I want to get into this video. I only watched a bit of it, and it was actually a response video to somebody who highlighted this very same point, right? Somebody tried to use this as a rebuttal. They try to use this as, an argument to say, see, look, this is what's going on. This is why black people are continuing to struggle. And if we don't have honest conversations about these things, the ones who have a chance of escaping that mental matrix per se are relatively going to be cooked, because they're surrounded by these types of individuals with this type of mentality, and they stay in the very same place. So without further ado, let's get into it.
They poisoned the water, defunded the schools, stole the land, and then turned around and say, why can't y'all get it together? That's not failure. That's a setup. That's a setup. And you already know what it is. They starve black cities and then blame the people for dying. There's a pattern you're not supposed to notice. They underfund the water, they strip the tax base, dissolve the infrastructure, and then turn to the camera and say, see, black people can't govern themselves. Right? That's not failure. That's all narrative warfare being painted out in a ritual of collapse that they themselves have set up. Here's the thing. They do it like this. Pick any black city.
I'm so glad that this guy articulates himself in the way that he does, because it drives this point home even more so. It's not just the ignorant, those who don't necessarily know how to grasp these concepts, that are pushing and perpetuating the victim narrative. It is those who are intellectuals. The black intellectual class who are still pushing the victim narrative are the most dangerous, because they sound like they actually know what they're talking about. They sound like it. It sounds compelling. It sounds convincing. But don't get it twisted. It's still rooted in the very same core problem, which is a victim mentality, which is rooted in unworthiness, undeservedness. If I don't believe I deserve something, I have to create excuses as to why I can't get something or be somebody. right? It's like, communism, socialism are rooted in envy and jealousy. They seem utopian on the surface. Oh, wow, everybody has it fair. Everybody's on the same playing field. Nobody has more than the other. Everything is owned by the state, which means that we all own it collectively, but nobody really owns anything. No private ownership of property, no private ownership of these institutions, of industry, etc. Wow. It's magical thinking. But in practice, what it looks like is a Maoist government. What it looks like is a Stalin-esque government where the people are absolutely destitute and a small collective known as your state, known as the government, is in control of everything. And so this very mentality right here, again, when it's pushed through intellectual jargon, it sounds convincing. So again, I'm going to break down these arguments, but I had to get into that point.
Any black city. We can talk about Jackson, Flint, Baltimore, Memphis, East St. Louis, Gary. The pattern is consistent and is disgusting and disturbing. They withhold state funding first. They gentrify or abandon. They undermine leadership. They over-police and under-support. They exploit crisis for privatization. And then they say they did it to themselves. They burn the roof, then sell you the tar and ask why you smell like the smoke. Here's the thing. Then they give you this sovereignty illusion. First, right? They say you have black mayors, black councils, black leadership, but they won't mention this. That you have federal disinvestment, redlining legacies, state takeovers, corporate extraction, and anti-black policy sabotage. It's not sovereignty. It's performative democracy with a knife in its back. And you can't call it self-governance.
All of this is nothing more than your socialist regimes. Though America is a republic, and if we look at it economically, it is majoritively a free market, right? Or some will call capitalistic free market. Democratic cities, democratic states, democratic run, whatever it may be, infrastructures are relatively socialistic. So they don't promote individual or privatized businesses. They don't promote for sovereignty of the individual. They believe that everything is essentially a part of the individual. And this is getting into Marxism. I recently reread through the Communist Manifesto about a few days ago. It's a very, very short, almost pamphlet-esque sort of book, right? No more than 80 pages, real bold text. And when you get to the core of it, it's basically human beings do not have the capacity or the ability to do in and of themselves. It is the oppressor and the oppressed, and it is the job of the oppressed to rise above the oppressor and to essentially abolish any sort of institutions that they have created, whether they serve the people or not, right? Because again, the reason why somebody is in power is only because they are the oppressor class. That is the core of Marxist ideology, right? Which is the core basis of communism or socialism. And this is coming from somebody who was born in a socialist regime. And what that looks like is 80% unemployment, the highest inflation ever, because you have state-ran everything. So when you put the full and absolute reliance upon government, then you have corrupted individuals in that state or in the government system, which is referred to in the Communist Manifesto as the state, right? The state owns this, the state owns that, the state owns that, the state owns this. You put no sort of emphasis on the individuals. And historically, as well as currently in the modern age, most job creation, most innovation, even government being able to do things beyond its own capacity has come from individuals, has come from private institutions, private businesses, people coming up with ideas, being a part of the competitive marketplace to create better and better products, better and better ideas to uplift the whole. We want to get into gentrification. I just did an entire video on gentrification, speaking of how it's seen as racism because it oftentimes impacts disproportionately people of color. Can we get into culture? And as far as why there are demographics of people who do not see it as their own responsibility to lift themselves up. Again, the argument he's making is basically a perfect argument for actual white supremacy, which is the belief that white people are better and more capable. Why is it that the black folks who are hired into these positions of power cannot make any differences, but instead must be ruled by some hidden white hand? Why is it? Because when I talk about conditioning programming, I'm very careful because I don't ever want to take away the point of personal agency, right? It's like blaming big food or big pharma for our health crisis as individuals. If I blame big food for why I'm overweight, as opposed to recognizing that they have an agenda, they have a business model that essentially looks to exploit individuals like myself, that's different than me saying, well, I couldn't help myself. The reason I'm overweight, the reason I'm sick, the reason I have all these lifestyle-borne diseases is because of big pharma. No, it's not. It's because I've made decisions based upon that programming instead of thinking for myself. That's where the sovereignty and the free agency comes in. Again, these arguments, they sound extremely compelling for most people because we have a belief that we can't control our own lives. We can't control our own actions. That the things that are happening in our lives are happening to us as opposed to a direct result of the choices that we are or are not making. So we can get into policy all day long, but guess what? If you're living in an economic system that does not allow you to, let's say, create whatever it is you want to create as far as industry goes, then you could gladly choose to go to another system. That's why so many people come into the United States or look to make their way here, is because the way we've set up our infrastructure, the system itself, right? Though it's not perfect, it is likely the best for somebody who wants to be entrepreneurial, somebody who wants to create something or create capital for themselves freely, or at least as freely as they can be. And that's why when you start going into democratic states, i.e. California, where I was raised, they make it far more difficult because they have a socialist mentality about things. They look to punish those who are creators, innovators, those who are actually going to move the needle forward. You kick out an Elon Musk and disincentivize him from creating the very economy that would benefit the place, that would rise the entire ship. Because you want to, well, whether it's, appeal to a certain base or to create this more socialist system, which is more and more reliant on a larger and larger government, people on the welfare system, etc. So, yeah, let's see what else you got for us, buddy.
If every lever is rigged, you can't call it that. That's not what it is. So now we're in a situation where people mentally, after decades of curated decay, they ask, why can't y'all fix your own communities? That's when they want to ask it. What, and they always do this every time. They do it with Flint, and you hear black people talk like this all the time. Why can't we get it together? We got the resources. Let's just make it happen. Are we being serious? Are we being serious? What's happening? What's happening?
And I have to get into this. I'm sorry. I have to get into this. And I'm not sorry. I'm really not sorry. I don't even know why I said that. In order to take accountability for your own environment, let's say you are in Flint, Michigan. So why is Flint, Michigan in the state that it is in, right? I think he's pointing out like majoritively black cities. Why is Gary, Indiana the way that it is? Is there no opportunity, no chance for that place to rise above its current status? Is it impossible for the people there to make different decisions? And I'm going to start at a very surface level, then we'll get deeper. So let's say when it comes to cleanliness of that environment, is it impossible for the people of Flint or Gary, Indiana to clean up after themselves? I know I'm starting at a very shallow, but I'm getting somewhere with this. Is it impossible for those people to clean up after themselves? Like, why is it that when you go into a suburb, you see a cleaner environment more times than not than when you go into these quote unquote urban areas? It's because there is less of an emphasis on a clean environment. It's oftentimes a representation of the people who are living there and the priorities that they have, right? is it impossible for those people to make different decisions when it comes to criminality? Because we oftentimes have this link drawn of, well, poverty is creating the criminality. That's a false equivalency. It's not to say that, many poor areas are not more crime ridden, but it is to say that it is disingenuous for the multitudes of rural areas, whether they be in the United States or across the planet, where you see very low rates of crime because of the culture of those people. It is insulting to the rice farmers in the middle of, non-mainland China who are making $2-3 a day, but are not infested with crime. It is an insult to the people of Tamalegana in the villages who do not look to violate one another, but still have a higher trust society or collective. So there are decisions that are being made at an individual level. There are decisions that are being made at a cultural level to accept certain things. That's why I always talk about culture. It's the customs, it's the mentality, the ideology, what is allowed, and essentially like what is glamorized and what is taboo. So if you have promiscuity that is glamorized as opposed to made taboo, then you're going to have more promiscuity and it's going to be more prevalent. If you have criminality that is more pedestalized than it is taboo, then you're going to have more criminality. That's why you can look back in black culture, in quote unquote FBA history, foundational black Americans. You can look back in the history and see that most of these behaviors were unaccepted. They were unaccepted. Now, if you want to point to something directly as far as policy, we can go to 1965. We can go to the Great Society. We can go to Lyndon Baines Johnson and the incentivizing of broken households. We can definitely go to that. We can go to second wave feminism. We can definitely go to that and the ideology that was instilled. But when it's all said and done, where is the personal accountability? Because two things can exist at the same time. You have a system that is looking to essentially enroll you as a customer, right? The welfare system wants to enroll you as a customer who is reliant upon big daddy government or sugar daddy government. And then you have you as an individual who can make a choice not to. And we had that throughout history, throughout time. It was an embarrassment to be a part of that welfare system. Now it is essentially commonplace. Where does that come in? So again, from picking up trash or not even trashing your own neighborhoods. Nah, but that's the white man though. That's the system that's oppressing us into having these dirty environments. It's the system pushing us into being criminals. It's the system pushing us into not making different decisions. Who informs your decision to educate your population in finances, in ownership? It is within the community itself. What is it prioritizing? Nah, but the white man isn't letting us learn about money. Look, you go to school, most people, whatever you are, you're likely not learning about money. You could say that system's not geared towards that. Then there has to be a personal decision. Your parents didn't teach you about money. You have to make a conscious decision to learn how the fiat system works, how the economy works, and how to work within it. You put things in somebody else's hands, and you're always going to get their results, what they want for you. You put your life in their hands, they got goals for you, but their goals end up to their outcomes, not your own. And that's the hard part of living life, is when you live intentionally, it's going to take you doing what is necessary.
Believe in it. Start blaming each other. Start fighting over scraps. Start thinking our failure is proof of cultural deficiency instead of engineered scarcity. They didn't just defund your city. They overfunded your shame. So now after the water crisis, the narrative starts to flip. You get an extraction and takeover. Outsourcing contracts, private equity housing takeovers, charter schools replacing community governance, nonprofit colonization, and corporate revitalization that displaces the displaced. Right? Like, you don't get to be home anywhere. Right? That's one thing America tries to get you to be at. You don't get to re-indigenize anywhere. They shuffle you. Right? They mine the collapse for profit and then make you pay the emotional tax. So think of it like this. They talk like this. You bled, so they bought the land, you wept, we write the op-ed. That's all that happens. We're going to get a New York Times piece. Right? That's all that's going to come out of that. Black autonomy, here's the thing, because I want y'all to stick with this. Black autonomy must be proved, not presumed. They don't have this conversation about rural towns losing their manufacturing. They don't have this conversation. They don't say, why can't white people fix the Appalachians? The Appalachian. They don't talk about that. But black cities, we're expected to overcome sabotage with no resources, no protection, no narrative defense. Black cities are the only ones expected to rise while being choked.
I truly hope that more kids coming up in these next few generations educate themselves at an individual level, learn about the history of the country that they're dwelling in, right? There's this idea that America basically spawned out of nowhere, or just like these slaves came here and just built the whole place up, right? There's no conversation about the multitudes of immigrants. Hell, forget that. The founders of the idea of America itself and what it took for that idea to be brought into fruition. The almost impossibility of a breakaway society that succeeded outside of its original, monarchy, totalitarian rulership. That in and of itself is something else, right? Get into the Thomas Jefferson's. I just got myself a copy of Washington's, the best of his autobiography. If we just understood what it took to get here. So now we have the first immigrants who came to this piece of land here. Do you know what it took for them to build the infrastructure that you now call normal? Because he talked about the Appalachians and things of that nature. Okay. And we can look at the very same thing to say there is a cultural element. It's not just black folk who take upon themselves this, victim mentality at scale. There are multitudes of peoples. It's just that when we see people rise up and overcome, it's because they have shifted their mentality as a collective. They're looking to overcome that mentality as a whole and to leave behind the old. It's the only way it can work as a collective. But oftentimes it starts with individuals and the decisions and the choices they're making. It's like you look at, El Salvador, that place was almost destitute. And then you have a president and a regime that comes in that looks to change the whole thing. Argentina was forever in debt. Argentina was forever struggling. Now they are at a surplus when it comes to their coffers, when it comes to their reserve, right? They are now thriving in essence, which sounded impossible until you have a leader or leaders who step in and say, we want to change this entire system. So sometimes it takes that, just like it did for America to become what it has become. And unfortunately, many people are now falling into this mentality if we can't make things happen. That's why I say we need to look back to history, even for inspiration, to say, look what we were able to do when we take our minds out of woe is me and instead look to create something. Like this young man right here. He is intelligent, like it's smart. Smart, dumb people are an epidemic at this point, all over college campuses, etc. Intellectually there, but as far as the information itself, I call it foolishness, because where does it truly lead? Wisdom is supposed to lead to a better outcome. So this is nothing more than a polished turd. It's like, you're leading your quote unquote people down the very same road of doing nothing and having nothing and building nothing. You are the Jesse Jackson. At least they made money off of their grift instead of uplifting. That's why I don't get in a lot of debates with people like this. A lot of people want to debate me. They want to do this and that because they want some clout, whatever. I'm not interested, because when it's all said and done, I have one purpose, one mission only. And that's to pull people out of that mentality of, absolving themselves of personal accountability and responsibility. I want to help to uplift people by them uplifting themselves, to shine a light on things, to bring truth to it so we can essentially dismantle those things from our psyche. I'm really more into the psychology of everything than anything else. I'm really more into the individual than anything else. I just might bring these larger social topics, but it's all based and rooted in the individual. So if it's not getting to that point, I'm not interested. If we're just going to circle Yerk, the entire time and bring up all these statistics and this restore, it means nothing to me if it's not going to move us forward as a whole. I'm not talking about black. I'm talking about us as human beings. Get the hell out of that victim mentality. You can be as impressive as you want in how you present the victim mentality, but it's still a victim mentality. Look what happened to us. Look what's happening to us. We can't do nothing. It's not going to help. Never has and never will. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Now, if you'd like to stay around, make sure to click that little subscribe button down there, or you can show some love by going to the description below and clicking on the button titled Buy Me a Coffee. Leave a little something there, or click on the Cash App. Leave a little something here. Till the next time, peace.
I fell in love with the sunshine. I fell in love with the light. I fell in love with the full moon. I fell in love with the night. I can see the light again. I can see the light. You can see the life in him illuminate the night. I know the time is taking. A 3-6-5, that's a full rotation. I see you looking up, you know them constellations. Constantly gazing like house of praises, you get to praising.